The separation agreement arrived on a Tuesday morning in February, propped against the kettle, like it was a piece of mail she had forgotten to open. Ingrid Vasquez stood in the kitchen of the house she had painted, furnished, and kept for 11 years, still wearing her coat from the night before. She had worked late at the community center and come home to find Reid already asleep or pretending to be. The envelope had been there when she turned on the light. She knew what was inside. She had felt it coming for months, not in any single argument but in the slow withdrawal of a man who had stopped being curious about the woman he married. She opened it standing up, read it at the counter, and set it down beside her coffee mug without sitting. Reid came downstairs at 7:15 in a pressed shirt, already rehearsing something in his head. He glanced at the envelope and then at her. "My lawyer says it's straightforward if we don't complicate it," he said. Ingrid looked at him. "Was any of it real to you?" He exhaled, not unkindly but with the impatience of a man who had already closed the chapter. "You've always been more comfortable in the background, Ingrid. I need someone who can stand beside me, not behind me." He picked up his travel mug, his briefcase, and left. She didn't move for a long time. The February light came through the kitchen window, gray and flat, the way Calgary mornings were in winter, and she stood there listening to the furnace run. Then she picked up a pen from the junk drawer and signed. What Reid had never understood, what he had never wanted to understand, was that Ingrid Vasquez had not ended up in the background by accident or by weakness. She had chosen it for him, and she had made that choice more than once. 4 years before the divorce, a senior planner at Parks Canada had called her directly about a landscape restoration commission in Banff National Park. It was the kind of project that defined careers, the kind of work that got written up in Canadian Geographic and hung in architecture school corridors for 20 years. He had seen a small green space project she had completed in Inglewood and told her, "We want your eye, your instinct for how land should breathe." She turned it down. Reid's firm was 2 months from missing payroll. 3 senior staff had given notice. She stayed up for 6 nights rebuilding their project pipeline from scratch, cold calling contacts, restructuring their service model, repricing everything. By spring, the firm was stable. She never told Reid what she had given up. He never asked what she had been doing those 6 nights. The woman who appeared in Reid's life 8 months before the separation was named Celine Marchetti. She worked in commercial real estate development and moved through Calgary's design and business circles with the ease of someone who had always found rooms that wanted her in them. She and Reid met at a built environment symposium at Hotel Arts. She was striking, fluent in the vocabulary of ambition, and she had a gift for making a man feel that his best self was the one standing next to her. "Your wife doesn't attend these things?" Celine had asked him that first night, somewhere between the keynote and the canapés. "She's more of a behind-the-scenes person," Reid said. Celine tilted her head just slightly. "That must feel lonely." It was not an accusation, it was an invitation, and Reid accepted it without realizing he already had. The morning everything shifted started the way most of his mornings did. Too fast and slightly behind schedule. He was driving to a client meeting on 9th Avenue, coffee from the Tim Hortons on 17th in the cup holder, running through talking points in his head. He stopped at a red light near the base of the Center Street Bridge, checked the time on his dash, and looked up. The billboard was enormous. A full building-side installation on the flank of a mixed-use development he had walked past 100 times. The image was a landscape, sweeping, immaculate, unmistakably the kind of work that made people slow down on the sidewalk. And in the lower left corner, clean and deliberate, Vasquez Studio, the new creative force in Canadian environmental design. Below that, her face. Not a photo he recognized. Not the Ingrid who wore paint-stained jeans and worked at the dining room table on Saturday mornings. This was a woman photographed in a meadow outside Canmore, one hand resting in tall grass, looking not at the camera but at something just past it, something she already understood. The photo had a quality of complete stillness, the quality of someone who had stopped waiting for permission. The car behind him laid on the horn. Reid didn't move. It beeped again, longer this time. He pulled to the curb and sat there with the engine running. Vasquez Studio. She had kept his name, or rather, he had taken her hyphenated name for the firm years ago and she had simply taken it back. The studio was hers. Had always been hers, technically. He had never thought to ask what she planned to do with it. He told himself the feeling in his chest was surprise. He picked up his phone and searched her name. The results were not what he expected. They were more than that, and they kept arriving. Ingrid Vasquez had been named one of Canada's top 10 emerging designers by Canadian Geographic. There was a feature in Azure magazine, a commission from the city of Vancouver for a major waterfront park redesign, and a CBC Arts profile that had been shared over 40,000 times. The piece quoted her, "I spent a long time making space for everyone else's vision. Learning to trust my own took longer than it should have, but you can't unsee it once you do. There was also a smaller item, from an architectural news aggregator. It was the one that made him set the phone on the passenger seat and stare through the windshield. Ingrid Vasquez had been awarded the Landscape Architecture Canada Award of Excellence for the Bow River Greenway revitalization, the same project that Reid's firm had put forward 3 years earlier, the one they had won a regional design award for. The award citation named her as the originating designer. He drove to his client meeting. He could not have told you afterward what was discussed. Did you see? His associate Dana said the moment he was back in the office, already pulling up the CBC piece on her screen. Ingrid's commission in Vancouver could set a new benchmark for waterfront development across the country. It's a major deal. I saw, Reid said, and went into his office and closed the door. The full story came out over the following weeks in the way these things do. Not in one clean revelation, but in accumulating details that refused to stay manageable. A journalist writing a longer piece for the Globe and Mail had spoken to several people who had worked at the firm in its early years. She reached out to Reid for comment, and the questions she asked made clear she had already spoken to people who remembered things he had hoped were forgotten. The Bow River Greenway concept had been the subject of a number of conversations among former staff. One of them, a landscape drafter named Patrick Roux who had left the firm 4 years earlier, was unambiguous. The ecological flow framework, the idea of treating the Greenway as a connected living corridor rather than a series of isolated parks, that came from Ingrid. Patrick told the journalist. She laid it out during a charrette session when we were still trying to figure out what angle to pitch. Reid built the proposal around her framework. The client responded to it immediately. Her name wasn't on the final submission. The journalist sent Reid those quotes before publication. He read them standing in his kitchen, and he could not think of a single rebuttal that was also true. Patrick had been in that room. Reid knew it. He had known it then, in the way you know things you have decided not to look at directly. Ingrid had drawn the concept out on brown paper during a Saturday morning session when morale was low and the project felt unwinnable. She had explained it in that quiet way she had, not performing, not seeking acknowledgement, simply laying it out because she thought it might help. He had stayed up that night and shaped it into a presentation. He had presented it the following Monday as the firm's vision. He had never explicitly claimed it was his. He had simply never said it wasn't. The Globe piece ran on a Thursday. By Friday, 2 of his largest ongoing clients had requested conversations. One of those conversations ended in a polite restructuring of their arrangement that communicated more than a direct confrontation would have. Celine ended things that same week. She did it over coffee at a cafe on Elbow Drive, in a measured voice that suggested she had rehearsed it. I think we've both been honest about what we were looking for, she said. You're going through a complicated period. I'm not in a position to be part of someone else's complicated period right now. He didn't argue. He sat there after she left and thought about how much he had wanted the version of himself that had stood next to her. How much work he had put into convincing himself that version was real. He thought about how she had told him in that first conversation at the symposium that his situation must feel lonely. How readily he had agreed. The loneliness that settled in after was not new. He recognized it. It was the same loneliness he had managed for years inside the marriage by staying busy, staying pointed at the next thing so he never had to look at what he was leaving untended. In the design community, word moved the way it always does. Quickly, sideways, and without your involvement. At a reception for a new cultural center development, 2 men he had known for years were suddenly occupied whenever he moved their direction. He overheard a fragment near the drinks table. Vasquez Studio just got shortlisted for the National Capital Commission project. First independent studio under 5 years old to make that list. A pause, a short exhale that wasn't quite laughter. She was always the one, wasn't she? I remember meeting her at the Bow River celebration. I assumed she was an associate. Reid left the reception early and drove without a destination, eventually finding himself in Inglewood, the neighborhood where he and Ingrid had rented their first studio space before the firm had a proper address. He parked and walked. The cafe where she used to sketch on weekends, still there. The park where she had once explained to him. This was the first year of the firm, why green spaces needed to feel discovered rather than installed. He had nodded and not really listened. He had used the idea 6 months later in a pitch that won them their first major contract. He had been doing it for years, he simply hadn't called it anything. He tried to reach her once. Through a mutual colleague from their early days who still had her number. He kept the message short. He said he would understand if she had nothing to say. He said he wanted a chance to. He stopped and started the sentence 3 times before settling on, to acknowledge things that should have been acknowledged a long time ago. Her assistant responded within 2 days. The message was brief and professionally warm. Ingrid appreciates you reaching out and wishes you well. She's currently focused on several significant projects and won't be available for personal conversations. She hopes you're doing okay. He read it twice. There was no sharpness in it, no satisfaction, no careful neutrality concealing something else. It was simply what it said. She had moved on. Not past him in the sense of overcoming him, but past him in the sense that he no longer occupied the same room as her attention. He had expected somewhere in the back of his mind that she would want something from him. An apology, or a confrontation, or at minimum the satisfaction of watching him diminish. That was what he would have wanted, in her position. That was what made human sense to him. That she apparently wanted nothing at all, that she had simply kept walking, was the part he couldn't put down. He thought about what he had said in the kitchen that February morning. You've always been more comfortable in the background. I need someone who can beside me. He had said it gently. He had meant it, he told himself then, to be honest. What it had actually been, he understood now, was an erasure dressed as an explanation. He had taken 11 years of someone choosing to make him possible and called it her preference. The work of rebuilding took most of the following year. Some clients came back, others didn't. He scaled down, focused on smaller projects, did better work in quieter rooms. It wasn't glamorous. He stopped attending certain events. He started listening more in meetings, which his junior staff noticed without commenting on directly. He did not contact Ingrid again. The announcement for the Women in Design Symposium came across his feed on a Wednesday in late October, the notification sliding past like any other. The symposium was being held in Toronto at the Daniels Building, and Ingrid Vasquez was listed as the keynote speaker. The session title was printed simply, Making Room. He told himself he was attending because 2 of his firm's junior designers had registered, and it made sense for someone senior to come along. He stood near the back of the auditorium with 400 other people, and found a column to stand beside where the light was low. When Ingrid took the stage, the applause was the kind that begins before a person reaches the microphone. She was not the woman he had known in the way he had known her. She was still recognizably herself, the same economy of movement, the same unhurried quality. But she carried herself differently from the woman who had signed papers in a Calgary kitchen in February. She had stopped. He could see it clearly from the back of a full room, making herself smaller than she was. She spoke without notes. Someone told me once that I was more comfortable in the background, she said, and I let that land as a description of who I was, rather than as a description of what had been asked of me. She paused and let the room sit with it. That's the thing about people who underestimate you quietly. They don't announce themselves. They make you feel seen right up until the moment they explain why you're not quite what they need. And by the time that happens, you've been shrinking for so long you've forgotten there was ever a different size. 400 people in complete silence. I didn't start Vasquez Studio to prove anything to anyone. She looked up. I started it because I finally ran out of reasons not to. And what I want every person in this room to carry home is this. The vision was always yours. The capacity was always yours. Someone else's failure to make room for it was never evidence that it wasn't there. The applause broke across the room like something releasing. Reid stood at the back with his hands at his sides and watched her receive it. She was luminous in a way that had nothing to do with the stage lighting. The particular quality of someone who has come through something real without letting it make them smaller or harder. The audience was drawn to her the way people are drawn to that specific thing in a person. The quality of having endured something and chosen not to spend that endurance on bitterness. He felt the tears before he was aware they were coming. Not because he wanted her back. That would have been too simple and too much about him. And he was trying, slowly and imperfectly, to be less about himself. What he felt was something older. The particular weight of understanding something at full size only after you have broken it. The particular grief of a lesson that arrives complete, all at once with nowhere to put it. He found a side exit before the Q&A and stepped out into October air on Wilcox Street. He buttoned his jacket, walked toward the parking structure on Huron. He stopped at the corner. Across the street, mounted on the side of a Bloor Street building as part of the symposium's public programming, was a large-scale photographic installation. The same image from the Calgary Billboard. Ingrid in that meadow outside Canmore, hand in tall grass, looking past the camera at something she had already decided to trust. Around her the kind of quiet that costs something to earn. No tagline, no studio name, just the photograph, and at the bottom in small clean letters, Ingrid Vasquez. The city moved around him the way cities do. Cyclists, students, a streetcar grinding past on Spadina, a couple arguing quietly about where to eat. A normal Tuesday evening in Toronto, indifferent to the particular education currently underway on this corner. Reid stood there for a long moment looking up. Then he turned his collar against the cold and kept walking forward. One foot, then the other. No other direction available and no one on the other end waiting. Carrying the full weight of a man who had been handed something rare and spent years deciding it was ordinary. Right up until the moment it became extraordinary for everyone else to see. If Ingrid's story stays with you, let it. Not because she needed him to see her, she didn't, and she never did. But because somewhere in your own life there may be a version of this. Someone quietly turning down their BAMF for reasons you never thought to ask about. Someone whose name isn't on the work they made possible. Have you ever seen someone realize too late what they had? Leave your thoughts below, we'd genuinely love to hear from you. And if you're new here, subscribe and join our community at Lost Soul Stories TV. Every week we bring you stories of love, loss, and the quiet moments that change everything. Until next time, remember that the people the world overlooks today are often the ones it comes looking for tomorrow.